of 1776, the British were preparing an invasion from Canada to finish off the rebels. There was only one obstacle in their way: Benedict Arnold, still chafing from his defeat at Quebec. Arnold planned to mount a naval blockade of Lake Champlain. The lack of a navy didn't discourage him. Arnold simply built one.
Arnold knows to beat the British that year, all he has to do is keep them from getting to Ticonderoga. He doesn't have to beat them in battle. He just has to string it out and make it take time. So he starts the building race to get the warships on Lake Champlain.
In 3 months, Arnold built a fleet of 15 boats and recruited 800 men. The British met his challenge by adding 25 warships to their own fleet. Arnold sailed his makeshift navy behind Valcour Island and waited in ambush. At noon on October 11, 1776, the British flotilla found him. And the battle began. Arnold fought with a fury. Lacking trained gunners, he aimed some of the cannons himself, even while directing the fray. By dusk, the American fleet was shattered. A third of Arnold's own crewmen were killed or wounded. All of his boats were damaged. The British anchored and prepared to finish off the Americans come morning. But in the morning, Arnold was not there. Carried on a light breeze, he slipped past the Royal Fleet in the night. In the end, Arnold lost most of his boats, but he accomplished his mission. It was now too cold for the British to march south, and they withdrew to Canada. This year, there would be no invasion. Benedict Arnold had bought his countrymen another season to fight. 250...
Okay, I'll let you see it again, in case you missed something.
In the fall of 1776, the British were preparing an invasion from Canada to finish off the rebels. There was only one obstacle in their way: Benedict Arnold, still chafing from his defeat at Quebec. Arnold planned to mount a naval blockade of Lake Champlain. The lack of a navy didn't discourage him. Arnold simply built one.
Arnold knows to beat the British that year, all he has to do is keep them from getting to Ticonderoga. He doesn't have to beat them in battle. He just has to string it out and make it take time. So he starts the building race to get the warships on Lake Champlain.
In 3 months, Arnold built a fleet of 15 boats and recruited 800 men. The British met his challenge by adding 25 warships to their own fleet. Arnold sailed his makeshift navy behind Valcour Island and waited in ambush. At noon on October 11, 1776, the British flotilla found him. And the battle began. Arnold fought with a fury. Lacking trained gunners, he aimed some of the cannons himself, even while directing the fray. By dusk, the American fleet was shattered. A third of Arnold's own crewmen were killed or wounded. All of his boats were damaged. The British anchored and prepared to finish off the Americans come morning. But in the morning, Arnold was not there. Carried on a light breeze, he slipped past the Royal fleet in the night. In the end, Arnold lost most of his boats, but he accomplished his mission. It was now too cold for the British to march south, and they withdrew to Canada. This year, there would be no invasion. Benedict Arnold had bought his countrymen another season to fight. 250 miles to the south.
Okay, I'll give you the lecture now and see where we're at. Lights, please, Brooke. Okay, here's the lecture I would give you on the British advance from Quebec. In the fall of 1776, the British Navy advanced from Quebec, Canada, to attack the Americans and hopefully finish off the revolution once and for all. And the only thing really that stood in their way, because where's Washington at this time? Do you remember? He's withdrawn, isn't he? He's withdrawn, and he's at White Plains, New York, and he gave up New York and its splendid harbor to the British. Okay, so he's definitely on the retreat. So the only thing that's really going to stand in the way of them coming down through the St. Lawrence Seaway and into Lake Champlain, etc., is Benedict Arnold, who's stationed at Fort Ticonderoga. Now, he's planning a naval blockade of Lake Champlain, but he doesn't have any ships. So, even though he doesn't have any ships, he's got this big plan to blockade Lake Champlain so the British cannot get down and cause damage onto Washington's army and end the war. Now, Washington troops are stationed at White Plains. If Benedict Arnold can get this blockade or stall them long enough for winter to come, he's accomplished his goal. So he has 800 men, excuse me, all volunteers, and they built 15 ships in just 3 months. That was the Navy he was going to use to blockade Lake Champlain. So Arnold and his men, which were about 800 volunteers, built 15 ships in 3 months. And these are warships. These aren't canoes. So, I mean, it took some effort. Now, again, the goal was not to defeat the British in this battle, was it? It was to string out the fight and keep them away from Fort Ticonderoga, because from there they were going to advance to White Plains and take on Washington when Washington wasn't ready for a fight. So Benedict Arnold's goal in this thing isn't to win a battle, it's to provide a stalling technique. Because time is going to be a very important ally on the side of the Americans. So Arnold sailed his 15 ships behind Valcour Island. I think you saw that on the video, in Lake Champlain. And what it is, you know, Lake Champlain is a lake, obviously, and this is not going to be the scale or even close, but it was basically an island in Lake Champlain, and he took his ships behind and waited for the British fleet to get there. So he sailed 15 ships behind Valcour Island in Lake Champlain and waited in ambush for the British ships. Well, at noon on October 11th, 1776, the British Navy arrived and the battle began. Now, Arnold was a little bit different than most commanders. He actually fired guns himself. He wasn't up there ordering the charge. He got his hands dirty. He got in there and got after it, made a big effort himself. And by the end of that day at dusk, his fleet was battered. He lost 1/3 of his men that were killed or wounded. His boats were damaged. They were going to capture him, and he slipped past the British boats in the darkness of night. And he accomplished his goal. What were the 2 goals actually he accomplished they mentioned there? Anybody get it? What were the 2 goals he accomplished? Be more specific. It was too cold to march south. The British, it was too cold because winter was coming on to march south. So where'd they withdraw back to?
Canada.
Well, Quebec. Okay? Instead of advancing to White Plains and engaging General Washington and his crippled troops, so to speak, they retreated back to Quebec for the winter because it was too cold. So that was the first goal he accomplished. Basically, the second goal, he said at the end, he had bought his countrymen time to fight another day, didn't he? Okay? So he bought his countrymen another season to fight, and hopefully with another season to fight, what could they win? Their independence, okay? So, go ahead.
One day was enough time to make it too cold?
Well, they didn't, when he put up that kind of a fight, they didn't know what they had ahead of them, and so they thinking, hey man, it's getting cold here, we don't want to continue this thing, it's gonna get cold. They thought they were just gonna march straight down without, go down there with no problem and get washed and bang. They found out they were gonna get resistance, and those days you don't know how much resistance you're gonna get, so they decided, hey, it's gonna get cold, let's just head back and we'll finish this another day. Yeah, Blaine?
So Benedict Arnold is still fighting.
He's still a good guy, and we'll get into him being the bad guy. Actually, it was his doggone wife that talked him into that stupidity. We'll talk about that later though. Benedict Arnold turns out to be a traitor, right? He trades out secrets and stuff for money. Long kind of story there, really damages himself. But behind every bad mistake is someone helping you with that. Okay, all right, that'll take us then to our next subtopic, which is retreat across New Jersey. Now we're going back to General Washington, because where's he at right now? White Plains, New York. That's where he went to after he was able to get across the East River and away from the British attack there in New York. Now, by this time, Washington's position was pretty desperate. Okay, and what's going to end the first of the year? Commissions, very good. So winter's approaching. The Americans had suffered heavy losses in soldiers and supplies during these continual skirmishes they've lost. And some members of Washington's army are seeing certain defeat. And so they picked up their guns and didn't even wait till the end of the year and returned to their homes. So they just left. Now when Washington understands that he's short of troops, some of his troops are actually picking up their guns and leaving. It was at this point that he decides to leave from White Plains, New York, and retreat across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. He thought that would be a better place for his soldiers. So at this point, in late October of 1776, his position is so desperate that he decides to retreat across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. But think of this thought. If Benedict Arnold's not there, what happens to Washington and this pitiful bunch? They just get crushed and the war's over. So Benedict Arnold, more known for being a traitor, really saved our bacon with that situation at Lake Champlain. Well, Washington feels that once they get into Pennsylvania, the Delaware River would separate them from the British, and he would have time to regroup and get some new men commissioned and get his men properly trained for when the spring came to fight another day. So Washington's philosophy is to get through New Jersey into Pennsylvania. There the Delaware River would separate them from the British, and he would have time to regroup his battered forces. Now how many has he got with him? Do you remember approximately? I'd say 9 to 11,000. Okay? Well, during their retreat across New Jersey, soldiers continued to slip away, just like they were before. And by the time they reached the Pennsylvania side of New Jersey, they only had like 2,400 troops left. 2,400. So by the time Washington reaches the Pennsylvania side of New Jersey, what's that mean? Halfway, yeah, halfway through New Jersey on the Pennsylvania side. By that time, he only had 2,400 troops with him out of somewhere between probably 9,000 and 11,000 that he started with at White Plains. Now, this was the point, I want you to write this down, this was the point in the Revolutionary War that the Continental Army had to either go big or go home. They had to either go big or go home. They had to go in and kick some butt, or they might as well just succumb to the fact that they're going to be British servants the rest of their lives. They had just taken beating after beating, retreat after retreat, and Washington made up his mind at this point that he either had to go big or go home. Yet something had to happen that was positive for the Continental Army. Which takes us to our next subtopic, which is Trenton and Princeton. This is a great story. And there's going to be another one of these people that nobody knows in history that's going to save our bacon again. Okay? Benedict Arnold's known in history, but not for saving our bacon at Lake Champlain, is he? How many people knew that? How many people knew he was a traitor against his country? Yeah, how many knew he saved our bacon from being defeated? Not many. Okay, so Trenton and Princeton. Well, what's coming up right now?
Winter.
And Christmas. So, remember British General Howe, William Howe, right? He's feeling the war's about over. He's going to celebrate the Christmas holidays in New York. He's going to relax a little bit. But he's still going to keep an eye on the American forces. So what he does is he assigns General Charles Cornwallis, and he stationed Cornwallis, he ordered Cornwallis to keep an eye on the colonists. So General Howe is going to celebrate his Christmas holidays in New York. They comfortably have New York. And he tells General Charles Cornwallis to make arrangements to keep an eye on the Americans and see what they're doing. Because what are they doing right now? They're marching across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. He wants to keep an eye on them. Well, what Cornwallis did is he stationed 1,400 Hessians at Trenton, New Jersey, under the command of Hessian Colonel Johann Rall. Johann Rall. So what Cornwallis, what's that? 1,400, I'll repeat it. So to keep an eye on the Americans, General Charles Cornwallis, on orders from General Howe, stationed 1,400 Hessians at Trenton, New Jersey, and these 1,400 Hessians were under the command of Hessian Colonel Johann Rall. Johann Rall. The date, December 22nd, 1776. And at that point, on December 22nd, 1776, the American Revolution is really all but lost for the colonists. Nothing is going right for them. They've lost every battle they fought in, every little skirmish, and they're on the retreat, and they're in bad shape because they only got about 2,400 left. And you think about, up to this point, they lost every battle with the British. He lost 75% of his army since he had escaped 5 months earlier across the East River. He ain't got much going for him. He's got 2,400 soldiers under his command when he gets to Pennsylvania. 2,400. And all of their enlistments are set to expire in how many days? Like 8 or 9 days, right? So he's thinking, when that day comes, I got nobody. So he decides, before he loses the rest of these characters, he's going to try to get a decisive victory to give people hope that they can continue to fight and win the revolution. Yeah.
This is Cornwallis? that we're talking about?
No, this is Washington.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, this is Washington. Washington's got 2,400 troops in Pennsylvania, most of them whose commissions are over in a week. And he's thinking, I better do something here or we're going to be done. Well, at that point, hey, a, quote, British spy was captured and brought directly to General Washington. A British spy was captured and brought directly to General Washington. This is a great story. Why do I say British spy? Huh? Because he might not really be a British spy. But he is captured. A British spy is captured by Continental troops and brought straight to George Washington. Now, normally, Washington would leave a spy to his soldiers to interrogate and find out what the story was and report to him. This case, Washington asked his soldiers just to leave the spy, and he tells them, I alone will question this man. So he chooses to question the man, this British spy, alone. Normally that would be done by somebody below him, and they would report to him, and then he would decide what was going to happen. That's how it normally would go. In this instance, he tells the soldiers to bring this British spy in. Leave him with me, I'll question him myself. The name of this spy is John Honeyman. John Honeyman is the name of the spy. John Honeyman. So Honeyman's brought in, stood in front of General Washington, the soldiers leave, and instead of questioning him, what does he do? Shakes his hand. Because Honeyman is just what Washington needs to get a jump on the British, to get something going. He's got valuable information for Washington. I'll tell you a little bit about John Honeyman. So Honeyman gives Washington what he needs to get a jump on the British. He needs this victory. He gives him information. Now Honeyman was born in Ireland, and at the age of 29 he enlisted in the British Army. And he actually fought in the French and Indian War on the side of what? The British. So at 29, he born in Ireland, and at the age of 29 he enlisted in the British Army, and he fought in the French and Indian War, and he earned two things: an honorable discharge from the British Army and the trust of the British. So he fights hard in the French and Indian War, serves his time as a soldier in the British Army, and he earns an honorable discharge and the trust of the British. Now, he's able to move freely between both British and American camps for the most part. He can go into both. He's playing both sides in a way, but he's really only on one side. But because he's trusted by the British, he can go into a British camp. They don't even question it. Well, that's John Honeyman. He's worked for us, so to speak. And then he could go into American camps too, until he went into one that wasn't really too familiar with him. And what'd they do? Took him, yeah, they captured him. Well, he did that on purpose. He wanted to be captured on purpose because he knew they'd take him to Washington, because what did he have for Washington? Information. Okay? Now, Trenton, New Jersey, picture this in your mind, is about 10